All right, so we didn't test this video sound, so I think that it's going to be good for everybody. But to set the stage for today, I wanted you to watch this video.
On a dangerous seacoast where shipwrecks often occur, there was once a crude little life-saving station. The building was no more than a hut, and there was only one boat. But the few devoted members kept a constant watch over the sea. With little to no thought for themselves, they went out day and night, tirelessly searching for the lost. Some of those who were saved and various others in the surrounding areas wanted to become associated with the station and give their time and money and effort to support the work. New boats were brought in and new crews were trained, and the little life-saving station grew. Some of these new members of the life-saving station were unhappy that the building was so crude and poorly equipped. They felt that a more comfortable place should be provided as the first refuge of those who were saved from the sea. They replaced the emergency cots with beds and put better furniture in the enlarged building. Now the life-saving station became a popular gathering place for its members, and they began to use it sort of as a club. Fewer members were now interested in going to sea on life-saving missions, so they hired lifeboat crews to do this work. The life-saving motif still prevailed in this club's decor, and there was a memorial lifeboat in the room where the club initiations were held. About this time, a large ship was wrecked off the coast, and hired crews brought in boatloads of cold, wet, half-drowned people. They were dirty and sick, and some of them were foreigners. The beautiful new club was in chaos. Immediately, the property committee hired someone to rig up a shower outside the club, where victims of the shipwreck could be cleaned up before coming inside. The outsiders made the life-saving station extremely dirty. At the next meeting, there was a split in the club membership. Most of the members wanted to stop the club's life-saving activities because they felt that they were unpleasant and a hindrance to the normal social life of the club. But a small number of members insisted upon life-saving as their primary mission and pointed out that they were still called a life-saving station, after all. The dissenting group's members were voted down and told that if they wanted to save lives, they could begin their own life-saving station down the coast. So they did. As the years went by, however, the new station experienced the same changes that had occurred in the old station. It evolved into a club, and yet another life-saving station was founded. History continued to repeat itself, and if you visit that eastern seacoast today, you will find a number of exclusive clubs along that shore. Shipwrecks are still frequent in those waters, but most of the passengers drown.
All right, anybody seen or heard that before? It's actually called the Life-Saving Station, the Parable of the Church. And we're not entirely sure who the author is. It's unknown. But I thought it'd be helpful for us to think about as we kick off today. We talk about it in lots of different ways. In the Bible, we talk about it differently here at Summit when we talk about growing in faith, sharing the faith, living the faith. But the simplest place to find it is in the book of Matthew, when we're told this by Luke. Now the 11 disciples went to Galilee, to the mountain to which Jesus had directed them. And when they saw them, they worshipped him, but some doubted. And Jesus came and said to them, "All authority in heaven and earth has been given to me. Go therefore and make disciples of all nations, baptizing them in the name of the Father, of the Son, and the Holy Spirit, teaching them to observe all I have commanded you. And behold, I am with you always to the very end of the age." So the parable of the life-saving station, I think, is an important one because it reminds us of the dangers of what can happen even as a church. That the original mission of a church can be lost as other different things, ministries and the like, begins to grow. And so we want to use that as a framework to begin talking about today and the decision the elders and pastors have made about worship. But in order to do that, I want to make sure we're all on the same page. So I'm going to cover a little bit of what you've seen before if you've come to one of the previous town halls, but I'm going to do it quickly in case, but we do want to do it enough that people who haven't been or watched another one can be on the same page. Talk about a little bit about my newsletter article and unpack that for you, and talk about where we're at. So every single one of our town halls, I've been starting off by showing this, and that's the history of Summit of Peace as a graph. Right there, that yellow line, that orange line is our baptized membership. So if you don't recall, baptized membership means that anybody who's a baptized Christian in your church is counted in the membership. The blue is our confirmed membership, so that means anybody who's actually been confirmed. And so the difference between those two lines tells you how many kids you have usually. And then our third line is our average worship attendance. And so this has been kind of the framework and the question that we've been running on for a couple of years now. The question of why Summit of Peace has begun to experience this gap between, even though it continued to grow in membership, and why its participation in the life of the church by people regularly on Sunday is not the same. And in order to answer that question, last year's town hall, last time that I fed you spaghetti, I didn't feed you spaghetti, the churches. I don't know why I said I. You guys are paying for the spaghetti. The last time when we talked about this, I told you, I presented you the idea and concept of size dynamics, that even though the church is a unique institution, it operates by human rules. Now, God can break those and do whatever he wants, but one of the things that people who study churches for a long time have figured out is that there are some things that happen based on the size of your church, and the behaviors that work and successful when your church is small don't necessarily work when they grow, and that's a lot of what we talked about last time. If you never watched the original town hall, it is on our website, and I would encourage you to do so. It gives you a good framework for where we're headed and talking about this, but I'm not going to go over all of it. I am going to remind you, though, that Summit of Peace falls in this church size with its worship attendance between 200 and 450. We average somewhere in the 280 range for quite a while. And so I want to refresh your memory on the characteristics of a church that is this size. A couple of different things. One, the primary circle of belonging is affinity class or program. So in other words, your church has gotten big enough to where it's not necessarily we're a member of that church because we know everybody. Because as we talked about in the original town hall, the day you decide to have more than one worship service, you now have two churches, right? You have the 8 o'clockers and the 10:30s, and if they ever intersperse, you get people who are going up to charter members saying, "Hey, are you new here?" Right? And stuff like that. And so instead, people say, you know what, I really like that youth ministry. They have a great children's ministry for our kids. I love the music ministry of that church. Whatever it is, there begins to be a particular ministry or thing in the church that people begin to appreciate. Another difference is that officers begin to do more of the ministry in partnership with the staff when a church is small. The bylaws and Constitution really make it sort of clear. The called pastors do most of the work, and there's a couple boards and councils that keep an eye on him to make sure he's not having too much fun or doing anything like that. But eventually the ministries grow to where it's too much. The church can't only pay people to do it. We need more leadership and things like that. And so you've seen that over the years as more and more people have gotten involved. Another one that's sometimes hard but important is the pastor becomes a rancher and not a shepherd directly. So more often than not, this means that they're working directly with the lots of people who are in leadership and directing different ministries than they are doing it themselves. And a lot of times, for you to get to know the pastor really well, more often than not, you're going to have to be in a leadership position or something like that. The church is too big for you to get to know not only him, the other pastors, that sort of thing, individually. So the pastor becomes a rancher instead of a shepherd. How does it grow? It grows a couple of important ways. One is through multiple options. This is where we began entering this phase as a church the day that we offered 2 different worship services. But then as we began to offer other things, music ministry, children's ministry, VBS, confirmation, all those sorts of things, our Food for Hope, our missions to Cambodia, all these sorts of ministries help people connect and grow. And then, of course, another one is quality now begins to be more important than it was before. Just a reminder about this. When you're in a church that's small and everybody knows everybody, Grandma Schmidt, who's always sung the Lord's Prayer on Mother's Day, stands up to do it when the church is large. Let me back up. When the church is small, everybody knows Grandma Schmidt and loves that Grandma Schmidt is singing the Lord's Prayer because that's tradition. But then when the church gets to a certain size, half the church doesn't know Grandma Schmidt and is wondering why Grandma Schmidt is caterwauling up in front of the church, right? And the people who know her love her, and that's fine with them, right? Because they have a relationship. But people who don't know her are wondering why, and visitors who come in are like, what is that lady doing, right? And so you begin, you get to a church this size, you have higher quality things, worship services, classes, even your sermons, all that sort of stuff need to be better. If you recall, there are 6 steps or 6 things that are suggested that a church has to do to sort of cross the threshold and continue not only to grow, but to engage its people to close that gap that we have been wrestling with. One is the multiplication options. You have to have variety. You have to add staff. Sometimes you need a structure change. Sometimes you need a great assimilation and communications program. You need a change in leadership style, and you might need new facilities. Now, before you all panic, you'll remember that one of the things I told you last time was that we went along here and I showed you how some of the Peace over the years has begun to do some of these things, right? And the theory was this: in order to grow some, you have to do some of them. But if you're ever going to sort of break this next barrier, you have to do all 6. So we've been operating over the last couple of years with the idea that, yes, we need multiplication options. Number 2, we don't need any more staff. We can hardly keep the ones we have under control. We do need a structure change, and that is something that council is working on. We need fantastic assimilation and communication, and if you've been connected at all, you know, for example, we updated the website that we think is much better this past week. If you're relatively new and you sat in on our SOP 101, the way that they connect you to everything, I think is much improved. The way the elders follow up with people, the way that we follow up with visitors, all these things are improving, and we have areas we wish them to improve. The continued change in leadership style, we talked about this, even going back to what I mentioned last time. So it may be that as the church grows, that if you are having your 3rd knee surgery, the pastor might not be the one to show up in the hospital to pray with you. It might be one of our hospital visitors or elders who love doing that sort of thing. As always, if you are having a crisis, pastors are paid when things are their worst, right? So really bad things happen, pastors are absolutely still there. But now we do more training, right? We train our Stevens ministers so that we have more resources so that we can counsel people. If Pastor and I did all the counseling for the people who need it currently at Summit, that's all we would do, right? So that makes sense? So the change in leadership style. And then new facilities. We're considering this half done. We think there's some ways that it could be updated, but we don't need to build any new buildings or anything like that. All right. So we're caught up there, I hope. Just to remind you of point number 1, this is where we're going to spend our time today, the multiplication of options. Our first step towards that happened almost 2 years ago now. We're about to start Life Groups 1.6, and so we pray that you would be involved in them. We've gotten great feedback from many, many people who are in them. They're accomplishing our 3 goals, which is helping with assimilation, helping people grow in God's Word, and helping with spiritual care. We've got great stories and testimonies about all those happening, so we encourage to help people grow. We look to start discipleship groups soon, which will sort of be like a life group that's on steroids. They'll stay together a lot longer, and they'll begin to do things like engage their neighbors and community, and that's the kind of group where you invite, hey, my neighbor's had questions about church, or he's struggling in his marriage, and we invite him in. This takes more training for its leaders, that sort of stuff, but we're hoping for that to come. And then, the reason why you are all here today is the last one, the alternate worship. So even back 2 years ago when a little over a year ago when we had our last town hall and we started talking about worship, we thought it was time for at least to study and think about an alternate worship time. So that led us to do the 2 studies that we did. We got responses from about 90 people, which is, there's actually more people in this room than that, so that means some of you didn't do it. Thanks a lot. We got about 90 responses. We actually got about 40-some the first time. We did the responses in 2 phases. We got about 40 responses the first time. The problem was almost all of them reported themselves as being regular church attenders. In other words, they went 3 or more times a month, and for that we're very thankful, but you already go to church, so I don't care what'll make you go to church more. You see what I'm saying? So we said, we got to figure out how to do this, and so we resent another letter to everyone from our database in 2015 who, according to our records, I say that very carefully because I don't want anybody to chase me down and say, hey, we got one of those, and we go more often than that. According to our records, you went 50% or less in 2015. You got one of those emails from us and asked to do the survey, and then those people did it. The problem is the results didn't change very much. So our results from that were sort of inconclusive. We received the largest response from people who already attend and attend pretty regularly, and so that, as I mentioned, didn't help what we were trying to accomplish. The other interesting thing was this. People claimed that weekend conflicts kept them from church, right? We like camping, we like skiing, we like fishing. Our kids got a volleyball tournament, a swim meet, whatever, right? They have these sorts of things going on the weekend, and that's what keeps us going from church. And so then we said, well, when would you like another service? And they said Saturday night. And we're like, if you go camping, how does that, right? And so the pastors and elders, we're not the dullest light bulbs, right? I mean, we can figure some stuff out, but this we were puzzled by, and so we weren't exactly sure what to do with that. Another interesting thing was response from people who attend less than 2 times listed other as the greatest reason. Now, if I would have been smarter, I would have given them a chance to write that in, but I did not, and that's my fault. And so we didn't really know how to correct this. So what it led us to do, and this was literally the meeting after our last Summit in May, the very next elders meeting, we got together and we said, what are we going to do? Because this hasn't helped us. We spent a year studying this. What should we do? And one of the elders wisely said, well, what do the other LCMS churches in the area do? We don't have to recreate the wheel. Let's see what they do. And so that led us to start researching that. So we began to research what the other worship practices of the other Front Range churches would be. But even in the midst of that discussion, a number of the elders wisely pointed out, they said, okay, well, that's good, but we also want to keep in mind our goal, right? And our goal is always reaching the lost. And so churches that do a good job of bringing in not just new people, but actually new Christians, it'd be interesting to know what they do, right? So combining those sorts of things. So that led me to do some research this summer that was kind of fun. So what I did was I started calling pastors that I knew in the area that I thought had some evening services sometime during the week, an alternate worship time, and I began calling them. And I called 1, I called 2, I called 3, and all of a sudden I got a trend that started to happen. With all of them that had an alternate worship time, they all brought up a couple of comments to me. They all said, before we started an evening service, we did the following things, and our suggestion would be the same for you, but it's for you to sort of figure out. But they all made this same suggestion, and after I got to about 6 of them, I got tired of hearing it, so I stopped calling. Number 1, though, was you should max out your Sunday attendance before you add another service, right? You should be doing the best you can at your existing ones because you're going to double your work for everybody by adding another one. So you should try to max that out. They also all suggested that you offer a worship style variety before you add an evening. So if you only have one style, in fact, most of them were kind of surprised we still only had one style of worship, and so their suggestion was you should have variety. We'll unpack what that means. It can mean lots of different things along the front range, but in essence, that was their suggestion. And in fact, almost all of them did 3 Sunday services before they ever added an evening service. Okay? So I came back with that information to the elders, and we pondered over that, and we said, well, okay, that's interesting. How could we dig into that a little bit deeper? So I started thinking about Sunday worship. So for years, the same sort of people who write about church size dynamics and study them as an organization have made the observation of the 80% rule. And this is not the 80-20 rule about where 20 people do 80% of the work. This is a different 80% rule. And this rule says this: when your parking lot or your worship facility is 80% full, it might as well be full, because then it's too crowded and comfortable for people, right? So the example of this would be if you go in on Christmas Eve or a time when our church is really, really full, you can still find spots, right? There'll be 2 spots here, but you got to ask people to break up to sit together, right? Does this make sense? Same thing with a parking lot. So the rule oftentimes that churches operate by, and I don't know, maybe Summit did this back when it was moving from 1 service to 2, was once you hit 80% full, you move and add services. Some of the pieces' official seating capacity is 285. That's what it says above the door where the greeters always stand. However, it actually operates closer to 245 because 40 or so of those seats are over by the organ. And when we're really full, if the choir's not there, bells, sometimes people will go over there. But for the most part, people don't sit there. We save that for people. So even if that's completely empty, our church can still feel full. Right? Does that make sense? So our capacity is more like 245. So we actually broke down the numbers and looked at the church worship services individually. At the 8 a.m. service, we average 160 for the year, but it's actually closer to 200 between September and May. So before you all start going fishing and camping and on your vacations and stuff, and if you've been throughout the year at the 8 o'clock service, you more often than not, it feels pretty full, right? And so we usually actually exceed that quite a bit. The 10:30 service averages about 95 for the year, and it rarely breaks 150 more than a handful of times. Easter, it'll do it. Confirmation Sunday will do it. Those are the ones off the top of my head. I can't think. Some of the other festival ones they might, but that's the idea. And in fact, if you look at since 2000, this is Summit of Peace's worship by its service. So the orange line is 8 o'clock, the blue line is 10:30, and the red is our average. So this has been kind of interesting to us, and it took us a really long time to figure it out. In fact, if you look, starting in 2011, people stopped going to the 8 o'clock or the 10:30 service. And in fact, if you look at the numbers, it literally started the month that I became senior pastor. True. And we puzzled over that, and we puzzled over that, and we puzzled over that, and finally, Dirk Anderson emailed me one day, and he said, I think I've thought of it. Can anybody else guess the reason? This was his guess. He remembers very distinctly when he was an usher back then that he was instructed to count at the children's message, both services, everyone who was there, regardless if it was the choir who would be leaving. When I took over, I gave the ushers different instructions, which was at 10:30, if the choir's there and they're leaving, don't count them. If the bells are there and they're leaving, don't count them. Count after, right? Don't count them. I don't know if everybody does it that way. That's the only thing I can think of. The only other explanation I can think of is the 10:30 people don't like my jokes as much as the 8 o'clock, because the 8 o'clock people love my jokes. Otherwise, I can't figure it out. Either way, though, you see that the 8 o'clock continues to have its ups and downs and grows, but the 10:30 has actually gone down over the years. All right? The other theory that the pastors I called posited was this: offer worship variety. And the reasons they said this was this. They said that worship variety equals congregational health. And I said to myself, that's awesome. What does that mean? And all of them defined it a little bit differently, but for our purposes, I want to take us back to the beginning, right? Lots of churches measure lots of different things that can be helpful. I mentioned it in Bible study today. There's attendance, there's buildings, there's cash. These are important things to keep in mind, but they're not exactly how you measure whether or not a church is doing what it's supposed to be doing, right? So when we're talking about congregational health, we're not talking about things that say, what can we do to make us the biggest, fastest, coolest church in the world? That's not congregational health. Congregational health for us goes back to the very beginning, which is what things do we do that shows that we are taking the mission of Jesus seriously to reach the lost, right? So that's how we're talking about it. The other thing that we had to keep in mind was the Missouri Synod, by and large, has most of its people in the Midwest. And when I talk to Midwest pastors about their practices and what they do and how often their people come to church, you know what my reaction usually is? I want to go to the Midwest. But then I remember places like Nebraska and Minnesota and Wisconsin are in the Midwest, and I don't want to go to the Midwest. So I don't know if you realize it, but the farther you go west, the less you are Christian and the less you go to church in America. Did you know that? Yeah. So one of the things we also wanted to keep in mind, even though there's lots of people who gave us advice, is that the Denver area is its own kind of bag. It's not the same as other Missouri Synod churches. And so finally, we want to talk about our Lutheran view of health. I got a quote I'm going to share you later on from the Lutheran Confessions, but they make it really clear. To be a Lutheran church, you need two things, and you need two things only. You need the gospel preached in all purity, and you need the sacraments rightly administered. And if you do those two things, you are the true church. And if you stop doing either of those things, you are not. So from a Lutheran view, this is how we think of and talk about congregational health. So it gave me this idea as a place to start. I thought to myself, I have no idea how to think about what that looks like. How can we actually verify any of that? But I remembered that the Lutheran Hour has its own magazine. Did you know that? Lutheran Layman has a cool magazine they publish, and they always have great articles. And a year or so ago, somebody published an article. Actually, it was Mark Larson. He used to be our mission exec out in the Rocky Mountain District, if you knew those sorts of things. He published an article in which he studied in 2013, and he did that because that was the last year they had all the data for. He studied all 6,500 and whatever churches in the Missouri Synod, and he found the ones that confirm the most people, confirm the most adults. So in other words, you're talking about new Christians, and the churches that do it with the best ratio, right? So in other words, because if you only look at the first group of churches, the churches that confirm the most, San Antonio in Texas has 7,000 members, and in 2013 they confirmed 170 people, right? That's a lot. But the ratio is not actually that tremendous. So also, to show that a small church can still also be a healthy congregation, they did the ratio. And the church with the best ratio is in Gypsum, Colorado. They have like 60 members, and they had 20 adult confirmands in 1 year. Right? So they looked at those two things as a way to talk about congregational health. So we decided to use that as our jumping off point thinking about, right? So we said, what are signs of health? So one would be baptism. So even if you're baptizing because you're a little baby and your parents aren't even asking you, that's still kingdom growth. We're still Lutherans. We believe that's efficacious, and so that's still kingdom growth, and we celebrate it. But we also have to think about the number of adult confirmations. One of the problems the Christian church has faced in America is we keep moving Christians around and counting them as new Christians. And they're not, right? If you transfer to another church that serves you better, I praise Jesus that you're served better, but you're not a new believer now. Does that make sense? And so we're talking about new adult confirmations. A couple other healthy signs that I would suggest to you exist are this. The gap between your confirmed membership and your baptized. I kind of gave you a hint to that. Why is that? Yeah, that's how young your church is, right? Do you have the next generation that you're bringing up in the Lord? Your weekly worship attendance, the average in America is 33%. Some of the piece when we ran it last year, keeping in mind the rest of the stuff we're looking at is for 2013, but when we ran it last year was at 56%, so that is a good thing. And then your ratio of confirmed members to adult confirmation. So that's what I was talking about before, right? That's the idea that how engaged, right, are your church in reaching new people. All right, so what we did was we took that background and we read the study that they did and applied to the whole synod, and we said, that's really nice, but we're going to apply it to the Front Range churches. Just the churches along the Front Range of Colorado, because like I mentioned before, this is not the Midwest, this is not the East Coast, we're our own unique ball of awesome, right? I mean, think about how many of those places don't have an awesome sports team that plays on Sunday to distract and be an idol to them, right? We have unique challenges that face us. So, there are 60 LCMS churches from Colorado Springs to Fort Collins. And what we looked at in terms of their worship, again, trying to verify what the other pastors told me, 34 churches offer only traditional worship. Now, I'm going to say something here as I begin using these terms. These terms mean nothing, right? A church decides for itself if it's traditional. You and I could go to a church that they call traditional and walk in and go, that's not right? And that could be either end of the spectrum, right? They could be doing high church stuff where we're waiting for the Pope to come out in a hat and incense, right? And we would say, that's not what I mean by, right? So all these terms, so I'm only doing this based on what they said themselves. So if their website said we have a traditional, we have a blended, we have a contemporary, or whatever, right? So I'm making no value judgment on what that service was. I'm using their own definition. Does that make sense? I want to do that for clarity. 34 of them offer only traditional worship. 2 only offer contemporary, and 1 offers only Spanish, which gives you a total, if you think about it, of 23 churches that offer a variety which include traditional, blended, contemporary, and again, these things mean different things to different churches. But what we found is this. 1, looking at average worship attendance. While this can be a sign of health, this is not the ultimate goal in itself, but we still thought this would be helpful. The 37 churches that have one style average 92 people per week in worship. The 23 multiple style churches averaged 388 per week in worship. And in 2013, Summit of Peace averaged 266. Now, as you realize, Summit is one of those 37 churches that only offers one. And the most, perhaps, interesting thing in the entire study was I discovered this. We alone drug all of their numbers way up. We are by far the largest church in the Front Range, LCMS church on the Front Range, that only offers one service. It's not even close. The next one is 70 people a week away, right? So keep in mind, we are part of that 37, and our average is 266. All right, baptisms. This is a sign of congregational health. New babies equals new Christians. 37 one-style churches averaged 3 per year. So they had 3 baptisms a year. The 23 churches that had multiple style averaged 15 per year. And in that particular year, Summit of Peace averaged 5. And finally, adult confirmations. The 37 one-style churches averaged 1.6 per year. They brought in 1.6 new Christian per year. The 23 multiple style churches averaged 9.3 per year. Anybody guess some of the pieces?
4.2.
We don't have to average any other churches, so there's no point, right? It was just us for a year. We're going to bring in your arm and your leg, but the rest of you, no. Yeah, so it's a whole number. It's 9. So talk about dragging up the 37 one-style churches. Now, also, that's the most in any year since I've been around. So keep in mind that was a year that was very blessed. All right, so we took all this information, gave it to the elders, and in fact, remind you, if you got the newsletter article or if you go on the website to look at it, you can find links to the documents of research that we created so that you can look at yourself. If you're really a glutton for punishment and want to see them, you can have them yourself. Here is the, at the end, if you want to take one, you may. These are the 60 churches. You can take those home, look at them. I would ask you to treat it with some grace because lots of them are sister churches around here. And I'm not exaggerating when I tell you that if you were betting on churches, there are 50 of the 60 that you would expect to close in the near future, all trending down. Things are not good for the LCMS along the Front Range. But you're welcome to take that, but handle that with some care, right? That's what I'm trying to say. So don't, we got neighboring churches who are not in good shape and other brothers and sisters. We don't want to be offensive or anything like that. Here's the really fun one. This is the breakdown of all the 60 churches and all their statistics. There's the 30 with the most confirmations, and there's the 20, whatever it was, with the highest ratio. So if you really want to see all the information, you can dive into it. Or, like I said, you can download it. All right, so elders took this for a few weeks, prayed about it, contemplated it, and they came to a number of conclusions. Number one, there does seem to be a correlation between worship variety and congregational health, but it does not guarantee it. If you look at the church-by-church thing, you will find plenty of churches that offer worship variety that are also struggling. So I don't want you to hear me say, and anytime today, that what we suggest to you is some sort of magic bullet that's going to solve all the problems, because we are not saying that. But we do believe that data shows that there's a correlation between the two. We also believe, looking at it, that Summit of Peace has maxed what it can do while only offering one worship. You've seen the attendance rate, just been flat for 10 plus years, right? And that's with different preachers here, that's with all kinds of different things, yet the worship style remaining the same. And as I mentioned to you, of the 37 churches that do one style, we are by far, it's not even close, the healthiest of them. Right? I should have done that. I should have taken our numbers out and seen what they were like, but I didn't want to because I was depressed enough about the state of the LCMS in the Denver area. So Summit of Peace has maximized what it can do. And so our suggestion and belief is that we should begin offering a contemporary worship service this fall. And in connection with that, it makes the most sense for that contemporary service to replace our 10:30 a.m. worship service. Now, in June, when we had our last Summit of Summit, people asked the question, and at that meeting I said, we don't have any plans to change an existing service. We would like to start a new one. And obviously now I'm standing before you and saying, I lied. Well, I didn't lie, but that's what we were at that point. At this new point, after all this summer, we have actually decided that this would be the healthiest thing for us to do to accomplish our mission. Now, I'm going to say a couple things, and I know you're going to have some questions and concerns that I want to share with you, but there's a couple things that I want to remind you of at the outset. Number one, we are Lutherans. How many of you know that? Excellent. Do you know who invented contemporary worship? Martin Luther invented contemporary worship. That is actually true. I am not kidding about that. What he's known for, right, is at the time of the Reformation, he said, what is the deal, Catholic Church? You still, no matter where you worship in Latin and no one can understand it. The priests and the monks and nuns do all the singing and chanting. The people just sit there and do not participate in the life of the church at all. This is garbage. He wrote a new thing called Luther's Mass to include the people so that they participated in it. And he said, you know what I'd love people to do? Sing. But if I want them to sing, what kind of music should I use? You've heard it. Bar music. The original music that Luther wrote was from the bar, was from pop culture, was from the contemporary music of the day, so that people would sing along, that it would be familiar with them. Right? The Lutherans' confessions are very clear on the matter of worship style. And now you're going to get your really long quote from the Augsburg Confession. All right? The churches among us teach with complete unanimity that one holy church will remain forever. The church is the assembly of saints in which the gospel is taught purely and the sacraments are administered rightly. And it is enough for the true unity of the church to agree concerning the teaching of the gospel and the administration of the sacraments. It is not necessary that human traditions, rites, or ceremonies instituted by human beings be alike everywhere. As Paul says in Ephesians, one faith, one baptism, one God, one Father of all. Concerning church rites, they teach that those rites should be observed, that can be observed without sin, and that contribute to peace and good order in the church, for example, certain holy days, festivals, and the like. However, people are reminded not to burden consciences as if worship were necessary for salvation. So, as I mentioned before, when we use words like traditional worship, contemporary worship, blended worship, all these things mean something different to someone else, right? There's no definition to this. When I said and stood up here and said, I recommend that we start contemporary worship, every single person in this room pictured something different, okay? So, what I want to express to you is this, so that you understand this. It will be Lutheran, all right? You've heard me joke around before, right, that I was born in a Lutheran hospital, right, in Wheat Ridge. Went to Bethlehem, Lutheran High, Concordia Lutheran, in Irvine, Concordia Seminary, right? So, like, I was been brainwashed Lutheran from the very beginning. And because of that, though, I still at some point professionally had to say, is this the church that I believe in? Does it teach, I believe, the purest doctrine, have the best expression of what the Bible says? And my answer to that is yes, okay? So I always am going to be leading a Lutheran church that is Lutheran. And I believe because of that, in Christian freedom, we could do other things. But for us, as a Lutheran church, we are still bound by things that are, shall we say, Lutheran. Does that make sense? And those things that are Lutheran are the things that are in the small catechism. I don't know how you learned it from your pastor, but hopefully he communicated to you that those 6 chief parts that are in the catechism, which I won't ask you to name, some of you look terrified I'm about to call on you. The 6 chief parts are all in our worship. Have you ever noticed this? The invocation is there, which is always a reminder of our baptism, or we will actually do a baptism. The confession and absolution are there. That's one of the chief parts. There's the readings and the sermons, which are both law and gospel, the 10 Commandments, all those sorts of things. There's the creeds. The Apostles' Creed is mentioned in the small catechism. There's the Lord's Prayer, and there's the Lord's Supper, right? So all of the parts of the catechism have always been part of Lutheran worship, and those will remain in what we are thinking of for contemporary worship. Also, and I can't tell you this enough, it will be our own. My desire is not in any way, shape, or form to say, oh, this church does something really cool, let's copy them. Because that's not, one, I don't think it's biblical. 2, I don't think it's smart. We are called, as the people of God in this place, to figure out the best way to communicate Jesus to this neighborhood. That's up to us. Not to go copy what they do in the Midwest or at Flatirons or anyplace else. But I also believe, though, that we're called to do it really, really well, but in a way that is our own style. And so much of that is going to be dictated by the gifts that we get. However, knowing that many of you would have concerns what this is about, I have put together our very first contemporary worship service so that you may see it and know what I am talking about. All right? So this is going to be an example. We're going to go through it quickly, but I want to show you, in essence, what I am suggesting that we do for contemporary worship is that we use the same sort of outline that we use for our traditional service at the moment, and we incorporate contemporary music and a contemporary way of expressing it, which I'll say more about. So, for example, we would do something like this, right? We would have what our theme of the day is, just like you have in the bulletin. We'd do our first hymn. Here's a hymn that's contemporary, and by contemporary I mean 11 years old. It's called Blessed Be Your Name, right? And you've got our opening hymn. We would not sing it this fast, just so you know. We would get to the invocation. We would do it just like Christians have done for 2,000 years, in the name of the Father, Son, and the Holy Spirit. Amen. This is where things would be a little bit different. So, in a contemporary service, we think it might be, there might be times when we'll publish and put up on their words for people to say. But just as an example, this morning, this is the text, our Old Testament text from from Jeremiah chapter 23. I put the first couple verses on it because it talks about people wanting to, prophets preaching what he knows the people want to hear and them loving to hear it. So I might do something like this. I might put this on the screen, and then Pastor and I would say something like, for a confession today, we're going to be reminded in Jeremiah that oftentimes, even as Christians, we struggle with what we want to hear and with what God's Word actually says to us. And so today we're going to take a moment of silence. We're going to confess our sin, and you can confess any of the sins that bother you today. Anything that's on your heart, any of those things that you think are a barrier between you and Jesus. But you might also especially think about those sins. Those times when we struggle with what we want to hear and what God is actually saying to us. Then we'd have a moment of silence. And everyone would, on their own, confess, and then we'd forgive. We'd have a prayer of forgiveness. I might say something like, the truth of the matter is that even in Jeremiah, God promises that he was always faithful with his people, that he is the one who makes them righteous. And of course, he has ultimately done that in Jesus. And so your sins, all of them that you confess today, and even ones that you're not aware of, God makes you this promise, that they are forgiven in the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Right? Then we'd pray. Hey, look, we're doing special music today. Where's your clarinet? You got to play it right now. We have a children's message. Here are our readings. All of them that we had today. Here's our next hymn. This is the one we did at the 30th anniversary that made me cry. That's supposed to be a secret. You didn't know that. We sing that song. That song's actually a couple years old, so it's really actually is contemporary. Then we get to the sermon. And so we put this on for a couple minutes, but then for most of the sermon, we leave it blank. People aren't distracted. We say the creed together. We have our prayers, just like we do even now. We have our offering. We have an offering song. This one's called Hungry. It's a favorite of mine. I love it for communion. Celebrate the Lord's Supper. You got to text me now, right in the middle of my presentation? Just kidding. Lord's Prayer. All that. The Lord's words. We'll do them as we do now. The Lord's peace, just as we do now. This would be we did this a couple weeks ago. We'll come to the altar as a communion song. This would be an example of the kind of stuff that we would do. We would have the Lord's blessing. And we would end with another contemporary song that's 12 years old. All right. So that, I know that is very quick, but it is an example. I have to tell this to stop doing that. It is an example of what we are thinking. These are my concerns. So one would be that worship is very, very personal for people, right? For most of us, the way we worship is directly related to how we connect with God. But I do, even having said that, believe that we can do it in a Lutheran and healthy way that will help people for whom this style is a barrier. I also have my own personal issues, and I admit that they are personal. Joanne mentioned it kind of in passing. There's like an entire row that supposedly worships together at Flatirons of all people who have left here, and all of them did it for their 20-year-old kid because that's the only place they would go to church. Now, we could change this, and that might never change. All our 20-year-olds might still leave. I am not saying that. But that breaks my heart. When our college students go to wherever they go to college, or in the military, and they try to go to worship, guess how many churches worship like Summit in the world? Yeah, we're really weird. We are not technically high church traditional, right? We do the printed bulletin. I don't know if you noticed, but Pastor and I are a little breaking the fourth wall a lot more than you'd see. You know, we're not really, really high church. And so when our kids go to a church that's like that, right, chanting, all that sort of they're like, what is this? And then when they say, well, the college service is over here, it's got all the college kids in it, and they break out the praise band, and our kids are like, what is this? Right? So this, and again, this is me personally, I want to have been able to say, I have prepared our youth before they leave to choose the right thing about worship, not the style. Do not let the style obscure whether or not they are getting the gospel and the sacraments, right? And then, to be honest, I just feel like, and I've said this in other contexts, that we're cutting out a section of just our demographics, right? You've seen, I did this as a newsletter article a while ago, and my theory kind of works like this, that in the 50s, 60s, at the height of the LCMS, the church was like this. It was like an island in the middle of the river, right? And the river is American culture. And you could not help but be brought to church by American culture, right? The people on TV went to church. Your people who ran for office talked about what church they went to. Church was everywhere, and you couldn't help but being washed up to church even if you jumped off on the other side. But that day is over. I believe now the church is on the sidelines, and we have to have ways to get people out of the culture and to our church. And it can happen through ministries like our senior youth, our Food for Hope, our life groups, but I believe our traditional limits and our contemporary adds to the people that we can do that for. Okay? So this is what we're looking at. Oh, that didn't come up by... we'd like to start it as soon as possible, like a month or so from now. I want to give you all a chance to digest. We want to get it on the website so people who weren't here can watch. We want everyone to get a chance to express their concerns if they have any to me, to your elder, all of those sorts of things. But we think a few weeks is good to do that, and barring like me being lynched, this is our goal, right? It is going to take audio support, right? So there's going to have to be sound equipment for contemporary bands, some things like that. There's going to be musicians and vocals for the band. So current plan is this. I told you that I wanted to do it really well. And the truth of the matter is that Summit is blessed musically in a lot of ways, but we do have a couple of holes. So Katie's working on the plan at the moment to help us round out a praise band with both a mix of paid people and volunteers from Summit. And the goal is that one day, enough of our gifts and things, our kids, whatever, who like playing the guitar, all those sorts of things, will eventually grow up and have a place to express it. We don't believe we have it all right now, but we want to start off with the best quality we can. So we're talking about having a praise band for that. We got musicians and vocals. As I mentioned, some will have to be paid. And then finally, last but not least, this will be the best chance of me being shot today is this. I just showed you what the contemporary service would look like if we had screens, right? And do you know why? Because if you're going to do contemporary worship, you should have screens. Now, I actually think and have wished that we would have them years ago, whether or not we were ever doing contemporary worship. So we're also operating with this idea and concept. We would like to add screens to our church. Let me give you a little bit of background. We got a number of different bids from different people came in to give us their suggestions on how we might do it. Some of them suggested that we do it the old-fashioned way where you mount a projector up someplace and they show someplace and you have screens that drop down, all that kind of stuff. And I alone said, I don't like that idea. Ruins our church, all that stuff hanging down, all that, I think, takes away from it. So the suggestions that we got from the people who were willing, some said, well, that's all we do is projections, and so then they left. But other people said, well, then what we would do is, LED TVs like this are so good nowadays, and you can get them so big that you can put them in your sanctuary. And our current bid suggests that we put them here and here, but because of this wood and its angle, we need another one here and here. So we're talking about 4 LED flat televisions that would go on the wall that we could use to show the slides, all those sorts of things for worship. And we'd like to get moving on that, get that together. I'll give you some more details about it, say a couple things about that. Now, I know that no matter how you feel about contemporary worship, you might feel strongly about this. And I also understand that. But I would like to give you kind of like some big picture perspective. Your reaction might be, I don't like for there to be screens in the church because it's like, and you can fill in the blank. It's entertainment, it's like whatever the case might be. But the truth of the matter is this. Every single piece of technology that we currently use in there once wasn't. And at one point, they brought it into the church and the people said what? We don't like that. And this is honest-to-God truth. The very first time that they printed a hymnal for people to sing out of, you know what the people said? Well, we should memorize it. Why do we need a hymnal? I heard stories about when Bethlehem was building its big, first really big building, and they debated whether or not to put in microphones and speakers because that would be too entertainment-like to have microphones and speakers, right? So all I'm saying is, You can have objections to this, that is fine. But I just want you to filter them through this idea and concept. Objects are neutral. They can be used well or they can be used poorly. We would like them and we would like to use them well, right? So this is our current plan and idea. Let me give you some details about it. We've got our estimated budget for all that we need to get this up and going. This isn't just for the screens and stuff. This is also the computer to run it, some of the things we need for the band, stuff like that. But the estimates we got are between $25,000 and $30,000. And so if we were to have this by the fall, we would need to raise that outside of the budget. However, the word has gotten out enough, chatting to people. I've called them myself because I knew our time would be short. So basically, if you're in this room, and at any time you ever in passing said to me, I wish we had screens, you know that I've called you the last month or so, right? Have I not? Because I have called you and said, if you would like to put your money where your mouth is, please do so. So as it stands today, we already have about 20,000 of the 25 to 30 that we need that has been donated. And we're going to be looking to try to get people to donate the rest of it in the near future. And that's what it would take to get up and going. Now, you get to hear this first, but there are a million hurdles that still have to be jumped over. I have to talk to the Altar Guild and figure out where banners are going. I have to talk to organists about what they want to do, right? I mean, there's a whole list of auxiliary, right? I have to talk to the trustees. I mean, they know that we've been getting bids and things like that, but we need to start talking seriously about how all that would work, right? So you are the first layer to get your feedback, your reaction, your concerns, all those sorts of stuff, and there's still lots of stuff that still has to be done. But we believe that this is crucial for it, and in fact, I don't know if I said this at the beginning, I've actually wished we had them whether we changed it, right? And in my experiences at the churches that I've had where we had screens, you know what part of the demographic liked it the best? Correct. Because they can... Wow, yes. Yes. The people whose eyesight is not so great anymore, trying to follow in the bulletin, especially if you're new, those people like it. And the other end of the spectrum is the young. The very first time I went to a church with Julie like that, where we went and they had one, our kids were each young enough that we were each holding them. And she goes, "Isn't this awesome?" I'm like, "What? You don't have to hold a bulletin and a hymnal and a baby at the same time you worship. You just stand there and you're the whole time," right? So the two ends of the spectrums, in my experience, actually like this the best. All right. Now. So let me just give you an idea of what we think it would look like to do the traditional on it. This is today's service. We did 8. Yeah, so it's the non-communion. But this will give you an idea of how we'd make use of it. And then I'm still going to give you a chance for questions, but I kind of wanted to get started on this. So we'd start with a theme. We'd still have the same sort of things. Time for the bells, the prelude. Here's our first hymn today. We give you the hymn number, so if you want to follow along in the music. Our Lutheran service builder lets us put the music on, but it doesn't let us make it any bigger. And it's too small to be of help. We thought that was going to work better, but we still have the words that get incorporated, so you get to sing the hymns right up there, looking up instead of down into your bulletin. And then all the parts of the service make it on there. The invocation, here's the opening sentences we did. Here's the confession we did today, right? So we still have some tweaking, thinking about to do. Will we do different colors if it's the pastor or the people, all that kind of stuff. But this gives you an idea of how everything would end up on the screen for everyone to follow. No, there won't be a bouncing ball. It won't be like karaoke. All right, we did this. We only did 2 verses of this. Why do I have all the verses in? Anyway, prayer of the day, it's all in there. Everything that we did today is in here, except now you don't have to look in your bulletin. You don't have to turn pages. You just get to follow along. All right? Same thing with, we got all the readings. These are the same as I showed you on the other one. When we do the Nicene Creed, it's a lot more slides, but works the same way in the bulletin, right? Yep. So it'll take some training. That's going to be part of the work. One of the things in talking to the other pastors who've made this change is, guess who ends up volunteering to serve in church a lot more than they ever did? Correct. High schoolers, youth. Yep. Absolutely. So they love the technology, and so we're going to plan on using it. One of the things the pastors cautioned me on, though, if you're going to do that, is then you have to handle it with grace, because they will do it like a high schooler, not necessarily like a professional, right? So there'll be mistakes, but we will be graceful in that and handle that. And this is what we think it will end up like. So, if you have concerns about this as well, I want you can still express them. We can take a little bit more time. We're going to kind of try to cut the video, though, because if people go on the website to watch a video that's 3 hours, they're going to be like, all right, so we're going to cut the video. I'm going to let you continue to ask some questions. The one thing I'll say, don't cut it till I say this on the video. If you would like to help us get our screens in the sanctuary, make your check out to Summit of Peace and write in the info line Audio Visual Fund, or AV Fund, if you'd like to donate to making that happen as soon as we can. So, thanks.